Tonight on Canton Confidential. 3 years after the death of John O'Keefe, his family is still waiting for justice.
She called and just said, something happened to your brother.
The Boston police officer found dead in the snow, a mystery that's exploded into a story tracked around the world.
I'm declaring a mistrial in this case.
Tonight, how a second trial could bring his family answers and further divide the town at the center of it all. Canton Confidential. Justice for John O'Keefe starts now.
It was 3 years ago today, the death of John O'Keefe upended the lives of family members, friends, and an entire community. It's a saga so many have watched unfold, and yet there's still so much we don't know and may never know. Thanks for being with us tonight for a special edition of Canton Confidential. I'm J.C. Monahan. Tonight, we are focusing on what ultimately matters, justice for John O'Keefe. It happened in the very early hours of January 29, 2022. A winter storm was moving in, and John had not returned home after a night out with friends and his girlfriend, Karen Reed. His body would be found later that morning in the front yard of a Canton home, 34 Fairview Road. First responders rushed him to the hospital where he was pronounced dead. Now, the investigation into his death was explained in court in great detail. Dozens of witnesses, weeks of testimony, hundreds of exhibits marked as evidence. Still no justice for John. Jurors deliberated for days, and despite their best efforts, they did not deliver unanimous verdicts on all 3 charges brought against his suspected killer, his girlfriend, Karen Reed. She'll be back in court soon. Her retrial is just a few months away. No matter what outcome that trial brings, those closest to John have been left to go on without him. NBC 10's Glenn Jones is taking us back to how the rest of us got to know John during testimony.
The world knows John O'Keefe as a proud Boston police officer of 16 years. The people who knew John intimately call him Johnny and say the job he loved most was being legal guardian to his niece and nephew.
Johnny moved into their house in Canton, the original house that Steve and Kristen had bought. He moved in with the kids there.
John's older sister, Kristen, tragically died from an illness, and just months later, her husband died too. Their kids were orphaned. A little girl aged 6 at the time, her brother aged 3. The O'Keefe family, in court every day of the trial, was devastated.
My wife and I had talked about having the kids come live with us. We had 2 small children at the time. 3 and 8 months were my children. We didn't have a large enough house to take on 2 other children, so my brother stepped in, moved into the house in Canton, and raised them for 8 years.
From 2013 up until his death, John O'Keefe loved the kids as his own and would constantly show up for his friends' families, too.
We were close. We did a lot of stuff together, pick up the kids, drop the kids off.
Him and my husband would always do the games. The kids used to call them my 2 dads. It was like they had a lot of fun together.
John's friend Michael Camerano on the stand said he'd go to the O'Keefe's household every Friday night. He knew John and all of his personality traits.
Everything was very tidy. When you walked in the door into the house, to the left, you put your shoes, your coats would be hung there.
And as far as shoes were concerned, is that something that you wore inside the house? Or?
He'd rather you not.
That day in January, John and Michael both had something to celebrate. The kids got school acceptance letters, a proud dad moment.
We were just congratulating the girls, talking about how good it's going to be, different school, and just really excited for the girls.
Another close friend testified later in the trial, Laura Sullivan. She dated John's friend Pat, became pregnant with Pat's child, but in 2013, Pat took his own life.
Immediately following that, John never really left my side, as a support system.
John would become godfather to Laura's son, another way John O'Keefe stepped up for his friends' families, for his own family. He was 46 years old.
We have reached out to the family of John O'Keefe. We haven't heard back from them, so we're going to bring in our Sue O'Connell because, Sue, you were in court almost every day of a very, very long trial. His family was there every day. Can you just give us a little sort of idea of what this was like? Because as moms, especially this would be torture.
Yeah, it's a horrendous experience to go through. You're going through the trial of someone who was part of your life, Karen Reed, and John is dead, and everyone there is cheering on Karen Reed. You're not getting any attention for the loss that you have had and that you are suffering. And I'll note that having, worked in the South End newspaper for many years, something like this devastates all the families, right? Whoever you think did it or didn't do it, they're all devastated. But when you have the trial going on and you have the victim's family that never really got the warm embrace that many victims' families do. And everyone wants to be a judge about how people should act in these situations.
Yes, it's very easy to do.
We don't ever want to be in this situation to see what we would do, but we all want to fight for our kids. We all want to fight for our brothers and our sisters. We all want the justice that we think we deserve. And the other layer of this is what we have learned about missteps that happen in the investigation, that happened in the district attorney's office, that we learned from the first trial. So you can imagine putting your faith in law enforcement, in the system, hoping that they will do what they need to do to bring you justice one way or another for the death of your brother, your son, your uncle, your guardian, your neighbor, your best friend. And then you find all of these landmines all over the place about the way it was investigated. So that's another layer of trauma that I think the O'Keefe and their extended families are dealing with.
And another trial is on the way for April. Stay right there. Of course, we have more to talk about, and we'll have more questions for you as well. In the 3 years since John's death, the town of Canton has been transformed. The small, quiet suburb has been polarized by public opinion, and now it's a name associated with a murder mystery known across the country. We have our Eli Rosenberg in Canton. Eli, I know you've been speaking with folks there.
JC, today a somber day, as you would expect, for the family of John O'Keefe. A close family friend tells us, and here in Canton 3 years later, O'Keefe's death, the fallout since, still very much the talk of the town.
What a great guy John was.
Tonight, a candlelight vigil in Canton. Around 20 people huddled outside Town Hall here, remembering Boston police officer John O'Keefe.
He was a saint. He was just a great guy, always had a smile.
In many ways from above, Canton looks the same as it did 3 years ago today. A fresh snow blanketing the town, just as it did on this day in 2022. Still, a lot has happened.
Disbelief. I mean, how could 3 years go by so quick?
Fresh flowers and a police badge mark the spot where Boston police officer John O'Keefe was found 3 years ago today outside a home on Fairview Road.
He was a great guy. Took care of his brother's kids after his death. So he's top notch.
I hadn't realized that it's been 3 years myself, and we're still waiting on. I don't know if we'll ever get all the answers.
A family friend close to the O'Keefe family says it was a somber day today. The family is spending the afternoon at O'Keefe's gravesite, sharing memories, still trying to process this loss. Meanwhile, in Canton, there is still mixed emotions.
Rest in peace.
It can be a taboo subject if you're sitting in a bar or a place of public gathering. They mention it in hushed tones.
I don't think it'll ever go away, no matter what even happens after the retrial. It's just going to keep going on and on.
And the vigil out here ended about 30 minutes ago. Talking with organizers, they say more events like what we saw tonight are planned to keep John's memory front and center. Live in Canton, Eli Rosenberg, NBC 10 Boston.
Eli, thank you. When we come back, the criminal court case, which is viewed by many as a way to bring justice for John O'Keefe, and there are still significant questions that need to be answered before the second trial of Karen Reed, including the fate of State Trooper Michael Proctor. The lead investigator in the case could be out of a job. We'll talk about that. Also, will all three charges against Reed be back on the table? The answer the defense team is waiting on. Canton Confidential, Justice for John O'Keefe, continues when we return. As we've mentioned, today marks 3 years since the death of Boston police officer John O'Keefe, and his family and the town of Canton are still searching for justice tonight. And now we are just 2 months away from the start of the second trial of Karen Reed, who's accused of killing O'Keefe. And there are still significant questions to be answered. The defense team is pushing to get 2 charges dropped with an appeal to the state's Supreme Judicial Court. Reed's lawyers argue a few members of the first jury said they had a unanimous vote of not guilty on the charges of murder and leaving the scene of a crime. But they were hung on the manslaughter charge, and that's what led to the mistrial. Judge Beverly Canoni ruled that was not enough evidence to pull those charges from the second trial. But again, Reed's lawyers have appealed that decision to the SJC. Now, meanwhile, Massachusetts State Trooper Michael Proctor's employment remains in limbo. He was the lead investigator in the case and was suspended without pay last July after his inappropriate texts about Reed were revealed in court. He's now awaiting the decision of a trial board, which is set to reconvene February 10th. Now, their recommendation could lead to Proctor's firing. So let's bring in Michael Coyne, Dean at the Massachusetts School of Law. Michael, this is big. If the fate of Proctor becomes that he loses his job, and he is one of the key people on the investigative side for the prosecution, what happens? How do you play that?
Well, he may not be called in the second trial. I think Attorney Brennan will take a hard look to see if he has to be called. My guess is they'll try to cover some of the stuff he did with other witnesses. I would be reluctant to put him on the stand. And in fact, if he's terminated, it may benefit the Commonwealth, believe it or not, because we have in Massachusetts, we have a missing witness instruction. So if you have the ability to call a witness and don't, well, there's a presumption, or can raise a presumption, that the evidence would be harmful. If he's fired, technically the Commonwealth may not have control over the witness and could then use that at least as part of a basis of why they're not calling him. Absent the missing witness instruction, it may benefit them not to call him.
Oh, we talked so much about that in the first trial. We also talked about how the defense team, Karen Reed's team, is appealing to the SJC. You had said in the past you don't think any of those three charges would be thrown out. We heard Judge Canoni say they're sticking with the three charges going to the second trial. Do you still feel that way strongly?
I do. I feel very strongly that way. We have a long history with respect to verdicts in the Commonwealth needing to be made in open court so that we can clearly examine that the jury is in total agreement. That didn't happen here. No verdict was entered on the record. No verdict was entered in open court. I would be surprised if the Supreme Court chooses to overturn that precedent and allow only one of the three charges to proceed.
We should hear. When do we hear from them?
Well, we got to hear from them very shortly at this point.
Right?
Since the case was pushed off to April, the court had a little more time. They may well want to make sure that the decision is bulletproof. But I would expect that we would have to hear from them relatively quickly because the lawyers still have to prepare for a trial now only 2 months away.
Wow. All right, Michael, stay right there. Don't go anywhere. We have more questions for you, but when we come back, a new prosecutor will be at the helm when the second trial gets underway. We'll take a look at what attorney Hank Brennan is already doing that may shed some light on how he plans to prosecute Karen Reed.
At some point, I did know that there was a statement like that.
Well, not like that. Did you know about this statement? This is all my fault. This is my fault. I did this. Did you know about this statement?
Objection, Your Honor. Did you know that statement? I'm allowing the question.
No.
Did you know about the statement that she repeated repeatedly? I hit him. I hit him. Did you know about that?
Well, that is Special Prosecutor Hank Brennan's earlier this month. He is the new lead attorney in the case. Hank Brennan says he plans to cut down on the number of witnesses, and his presence, as you can feel even in that small little clip right there, is really different from what we experienced with the Assistant DA, Adam Lally. I haven't said his name in a while. We're welcoming back Sue and Michael Coyne here. Two very different styles, it feels like. Sue, we'll go to you first because, again, you were in the courtroom. This will be a new jury with really like a new tenor coming in for the way that they're going to lay this out, it sounds like.
Important point, though, the jury may not necessarily have experienced Adam Lally. You know, they may not have watched. They might just have seen, so they're not going to have anything to really compare to. But for me, in the courtroom, I mean, the difference, I think, is going to be one of pace, one of storytelling. I'm not watching a lot of the pre-trial stuff, so I can have a kind of clean slate when I go in there. But what I do see is we're moving along here. We're getting to the questions. We're not wasting any time. We're not talking about things that may not be important later on. So I think there's going to be a different pep in the step of the Commonwealth.
Michael, as a lawyer, do you agree that we're already starting to get a sense that Brennan's going to take a different attack this time? Because there was a lot of criticism about the slow pace and the number of witnesses and pieces of evidence, frankly, the first time around.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, what you've already seen is an aggressiveness with respect to some of the motions in limine, the dog bite expert, the searching for the cell phones of the parents and the like. He's really taking a fresh look at the case and trying to have the judge take a fresh look at some of the evidence that she introduced last time. Now, even though he ultimately lost the dog bite witness, the fact is he had a free chance now for cross-examination. He saw what works, he saw what would undercut her credibility, and that gives him an advantage going into trial.
There has to be an advantage on both sides, I would suspect, although, again, we're shaking up the prosecuting side and the team and how they're going to handle it. I'm going to throw this one at you. The defense, I assume they're preparing in a different way this time around, at least on some level.
She said, Ms. Reed has said to Kirsten that, in fact, they're relooking at everything and will try a slightly different case this time in all likelihood. They know what didn't work. They had ultimately, that jury was 9-3 to convict. They're going to have to try to revise in order to try and get a jury that will agree with a not guilty verdict.
So we've thrown out a couple of things here, like the dog bite expert, and this goes back to the fact that there are so many witnesses and pieces of evidence that when we were talking about this again, I had forgotten a lot of it, the minutia that we got into that time around. So, Sue, again, in the courtroom, I know you would comment a lot about how the jury was feeling that day and that there were days where the slouching began, and but this time, you know, it feels like it will be different.
If they just shorten the amount of witnesses, you know, I think some of those witnesses were redundant and didn't really move anything forward for the Commonwealth. I mean, remember, I think the defense only had 4 or 5 witnesses, a very short number, a small number. So if they're actually able to consolidate or ask fewer questions of the witnesses, I think that the jurors will be able to pay more attention with, I think, an open mind. And Michael, you could speak to this better than I, but you know, at some point, if you think you're hearing the same thing over and over again, you stop listening.
Yeah,
right.
My kids have proven that.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So if someone's going to come up and talk again about what the scene was, when they showed up, what happened, and there's no new information, jurors just, you could just see the gaze go over.
As a lawyer, though, with the oh my God, the question just went right out of my head. See, because you gave me all the minutia.
I hypnotized you.
Well,
you did, actually.
I think your question was, what will he focus on this time? I think he's going to...
This is why we have...
Why he is who he is.
He's going to focus on the drinking, the driving, and the deadly consequences. The theme that we are exposed to from middle school on. Forget all the other witnesses that came early in this case. Let's pick up this case from the time he's found on the front lawn of 34 Fairview, and then the jury will be brought into it and want to solve that mystery just like the rest of us.
I have to redeem myself because the question came back into my head right now, which is, we heard after the trial about the fact that there was a unanimous verdict, so some jurors said, on 2 of the counts. Knowing that, as Brennan is going in, that must also take a way or reposition him in how he's going to play it, knowing that in the last time there's very high likelihood that they said not guilty on 2 charges.
The third count doesn't make sense to me if they had a verdict on that, if they didn't reach it on 2. I've always said I do not see this as a first-degree murder case. So even if the Supreme Court agrees that the first-degree murder charge is out, I don't think you would see, if they kept it in the case, that there'll be as much focus on the intent to kill as we had in the last case. We don't need the Aruba witnesses. We don't need a lot of that stuff that came early. Accidents happen, but here that has deadly consequences. And if she's responsible for it, she will be convicted.
All right, we will find out. We're going to be right back. Stay right there. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Karen Reed will be back in court to defend her innocence beginning April 1st, and we will be bringing you live coverage just like we did the first trial. We will be carrying testimony live every day on digital streaming platforms and on our sister station, NECN, followed by analysis as we do right here on NBC 10 Boston. But as we say goodbye tonight, we want to return to the victim at the center of this case, which is John O'Keefe. Today marks 3 years since his death. He served as a Boston police officer for 16 years and the legal guardian to his niece and nephew. He leaves behind a family in mourning, a community looking for justice. For Canton Confidential, I'm JC Monahan, wishing you all a good night.